Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion today on the renewable energy revolution in the Caribbean. I have three amazing guests with me today. First, we have James Fletcher, who led the COP21 negotiations for the Caribbean, and he has been a member of the cabinet in St. Lucia and played a key role in the 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign. Next, we have Therese Turner-Jones, who is one of the leading minds and action takers in the policy space in the Caribbean. She's making a major impact for the Caribbean through her career at the IDB and has been advising on sustainability and climate in these past few years to make sustainability actionable in the Caribbean. And then we have Roland Roesch. He is acting director of IRENA and is helping governments in the region to build the roadmaps and policy frameworks that will make renewable energy a reality in the Caribbean. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go right into the discussion, and I'll start with you, Jimmy. You represented the Caribbean well recently at the CREF conference in Miami, and I would just like to ask you to give us an update. What really stood out at this conference?
Thank you, Marla, and hi, everyone. This was really the 15th version of CREF. The first one was many years ago in Montego Bay, and I'm a veteran of CREF because I remember going to that first CREF in Montego Bay, and I've been to quite a few of the others. CREF is an excellent medium for bringing all of the policymakers in the energy space in the Caribbean together, and this 15th anniversary did very much the same. It didn't disappoint. So you have the governments represented at the very highest level by the ministers, the utility companies, very important, and the development partners and some other players in the industry. So I think the biggest utility of this CREF, like all of the other CREFs, was really bringing everybody together in one space. So there was a lot of networking taking place. Right? My second day was spent attending meetings, bilaterals, more than it was taking part in some of the panels that were being held. It was good for us to get a lay of the land. Where are we with the energy transition in the Caribbean, and to see some of the progress that has been made, because there has been some progress made, not enough, and I'm sure we'll get into this later on in this discussion, but you see there's movement in some countries. So what's happening in Barbados, for example, with the position taken by Prime Minister Motley, freeing up the energy market for residential consumers. I think that has been a very positive development, and you're seeing a very heavy uptake of distributed generation, particularly in the area of solar. Jamaica, as always, is a big player in the energy space in the Caribbean, and Jamaica seems to be doing continuing its work there. Trinidad and Tobago, interestingly, a country that has not really been one that we've looked at for movement in energy. Trinidad is saying some good things now. They're talking about 100 plus megawatt solar farm and a new fleet of public vehicles, electric vehicles in the public sector. So I think that for me was the best part of CREF, but also seeing what's happening with ESG. How are people taking on ESG in the corporate world, and how is that driving policy within the private sector? How are we developing bankable projects, which is a big issue for us? How do we scale projects, particularly for the smaller economies, so that the big players in the energy market will be interested in a geothermal project in Nevis, or geothermal project in St. Lucia, where we only talking about 30 megawatts, or a solar farm in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So how are we scaling those? And then also at the individual country level to see what's happening there. So that for me was really the utility of this graph, seeing where we are, how far we've reached, a very good stock take, but also it's unrivaled for its networking capacity.
I'm glad to hear that my country featured on the list of positive developments. Roland, can you tell us how far is this region along in its net zero journey, and are our targets even realistic?
Yes, thank you very much for having me here on behalf of the International Renewable Energy Agency. IRENA is a governmental organization with 168 member countries, and many of our countries are also in the Caribbean. And according to the IRENA World Energy Transition Outlook for Latin America and the Caribbean, the region has a potential to reach 70% renewable energy in the power sector by 2030, with offshore wind and solar and geothermal playing a major role in this transition. Several islands in the Caribbean region have made significant progress towards transitioning to renewable energy. Just to mention a few here, for instance, St. Kitts and Nevis aims to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2030, while Jamaica has set a target of 50% of renewable energy by 2030. And these islands have recognized the advantages that renewable energy can bring and are making strides to transition away from fossil fuels. The majority of small islands development states in the region have submitted also national determined contributions that include renewable energy targets, but achieving this target is often contingent on external funding and technical assistance. Each island, of course, has unique characteristics and resources which should be taken into consideration when setting targets. So, for example, islands with high solar resources may focus mainly on solar PV deployment, while islands with abundant wind resources may prioritize the wind energy option. Wind and several islands, including Curaçao, Trinidad and Tobago, the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico are already exploring the potential for offshore wind projects, which is another strong resource of renewable energy baseload that can be used and developed in some of the Caribbean islands. And then also significant opportunities for small island development states in the region to explore new technologies, where, for instance, ocean energy technologies can play a role, but also the link, let's say the linking of producing, let's say, electricity that can be used for electromobility, but also the link for green hydrogen production is being considered in some of the small island development states. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that overview, Roland. Therese, what is your take on all of this? And particularly, I want to hear from you on, what is your view on the oil exploration taking place in the Caribbean and how we seem to be expanding on that side as well? You're not able to unmute?
Yeah, I just got
Melissa,
it. I just got it. Melissa was controlling it. Thank you, Marla, and it's such a great opportunity to have this discussion. And when I thought about doing this with you, the idea was motivated by the fact that CREF was having this meeting coming up. We've heard about all of these various developments and announcements by governments across the region around some oil exploration. We know, of course, what's going on in Guyana, which is massive, and that's I try to wrap my head around Guyana every single day of the week, because it's just such an outlier in terms of what Guyana is discovering, and also the fact that it's going to be like in the top 3 oil producers almost as of now. It's extraordinary. It's right in our region. I think we have to think about these consequences. I also think the relevance of having this kind of event and putting it up for anyone to access is to make sure that every citizen in this region is vested in this topic. So, right now and I think this is the way governments work, and multilaterals working with governments, we tend to do the policy. We tend not to, take the policy down to the level of the consumer or even the average citizen. So part of this is getting every Caribbean citizen at least on the same page in terms of what's happening in our region, so that they're aware, because I think there's a lot that individually we can do together. On the issue of oil exploration in the region, I think this is, for me, as an economist, as somebody who is concerned about the climate, I find it troubling. Of course, I understand the motivation behind it. Every state wants to be able to have secure energy at the lowest possible price, but I think we really have to think hard about the long-term cost of this and what it is, what's the message we're sending to the world when, on the one hand, we know that the Caribbean region is extremely vulnerable to the impact of climate change as a result of greenhouse gas emissions coming from big estates around the world. And if we get into this business, then I think we're a bit compromised in terms of what we say in global fora around assistance that we need. So that's one point. And then the second point is, at the end of this conversation, we want to make sure that there are some takeaways that people can think through what it is that I can do as a consumer, as an owner of a business. What should I be doing to help advance the objective of getting to net zero, or pushing for more renewable energy or energy efficiency? Because there's some very practical things that we as consumers and business owners can do, and also to generate discussion at every level, even with children, to say, what kind of future do we want for our region?
Thank you, Therese. Jimmy, I want to go back to you. So we talked about this contradiction, and Therese, of course, was the brainchild behind the three of us, the four of us, coming together to have this discussion, because it is important to raise awareness. But yes, we do have this contradiction. And what is your position on these contradictions, and what are the impediments to this renewable energy green transition to net zero that we're all trying to achieve at some point?
It's a fascinating question, Marla, because from the point of view of Ghana, a country that has been a little anemic in its development over the last couple of decades. I mean, we saw the flight of intellectual capital out of Ghana. For it to be placed in a position now where its GDP is growing at astronomical rates, it's difficult to resist that temptation that oil and gas exploration brings to it, and the potential for oil and gas exploration, what it can do for the country Ghana itself. I've been having some discussions with officials in Ghana, and one of the things I am happy about, the only thing I'm happy about, is that Ghana seems to be using this newfound wealth in oil and gas to push its low carbon development strategy. So the government of Ghana has a very clear low carbon development strategy, where it almost sees oil and gas exploration as a means to an end. So that yes, we will take the money from this and we'll use it to help us on this transition to net zero. Now, whether that's realistic, whether it's practicable, I don't know. But at least they haven't abandoned their impulse towards net zero and towards developing a low carbon, developing Ghana into a low carbon country. With the wealth of oil and gas resources that they have at their disposal, I don't know how quickly that will happen. But Therese is absolutely correct. When you, as a region, we are out there making noise on behalf of small island developing states about the need for countries like Saudi Arabia and all of the big oil and gas producers in the world to keep that oil and gas in the ground. Don't explore it, don't take it out, because that is what is contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing global warming and climate change. It's difficult for us to still maintain that moral high ground when we are not only saying, okay, well, with Trinidad, we've always had that, but we're now going into new exploration with Ghana. So that poses a dilemma for us, absolutely. Maybe one of the things that the government of Ghana could have looked at is say to the international community, how much will you pay us? How much are you willing to pay us to keep this in the ground? So yes, our GDP will grow and we will get all of this wealth from extracting this oil and gas, and our economy will grow at a rate of 30% a year. We don't want to do that. We want to play our part, as we have been all over the years, in helping to decarbonize our economies, the global economy. So you need to pay us to keep those fossil fuels in the ground. As we've been saying to people like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, you need to keep your fossil fuels in the ground. And I think that should have been part of the discussion. That was never the discussion. What you saw, unfortunately, was the big oil and gas companies descending on Ghana and taking out those resources as quickly as possible. So that's my disappointment in this, that Ghana chose the path of least resistance, where I think there were innovative opportunities that were available to it. But the only comfort I take is in discussions with the authorities. They've told me that they have not lost sight of the need to completely decarbonize the economy, that they are very consistent in implementing their low carbon development strategy, which is actually a very comprehensive and a very well written strategy. But it's kind of difficult, when you're taking oil and gas out of the ground, and then you're also saying, well, no, but you other countries should not be doing it. It's a difficult one to resolve.
Yeah.
Indeed. And you know, Guyana is already in a unique position where they have this very unique arrangement with the Norwegians to keep to not cut their trees down and to keep their forest at a certain size with a minimal deforestation every year. So already they have this kind of an arrangement that perhaps can be a precedent for something in oil and gas. And even in Barbados, we have marine blocks being put up for auction for oil and gas exploration. So it's not just Guyana, where you have, for example, BP. BP said they're just switching their model, and they're not going to extract oil and gas in any new territory that they're not already in. So you're seeing that coming from an energy company, and then you're seeing Barbados looking to oil and gas to be part of its energy mix. So there are lots of contradictions all around.
Yeah.
Roland, I wanted to switch to you to talk about what are the challenges in building the potential for this energy transition in the region. I know we have lots of issues around, and you spoke about building institutional capacity and collaboration. Can you share your thoughts on that with us?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Marla. That's very, very interesting opportunity. And let's say if we look to the challenges for the island states in the Caribbean, then we have to see that this region is, I think, because of historical matters, still heavily dependent on imported fossil fuels for electricity generation. And I think the availability of grid-connected renewable energy resources can still be significantly developed. I think there is more potential as has been used now. That's very clear. Of course, the fossil dependency makes and creates vulnerability to price volatility and supply issues here. And I think significant economic and environmental costs are related to the fossil fuels, and let's say climate change is only one of these. But then very important is to support and to strengthen the financial resources and the availability of funds for the development of renewable energy projects on those Caribbean island states, and to develop, and there IRENA is doing a lot in supporting, let's say, the capacity and the technical expertise on the islands to be able to develop and operate renewable energy projects. Also important to mention here is the transportation sector is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emission and is a crucial area of focus for decarbonization efforts in islands, and in particular have unique challenges and opportunities for transport electrification due to the limited land area, concentrated population, and higher transport costs. So there is a possibility to better connect the renewable energy generation with the end use sector, specifically in the transport sector. We have worked on a roadmap on Barbados a while ago, where we have created a case where also the renewable energy electrification can help to charge and to support electromobility. Let's say if I speak about the specifically positive aspects for the renewable energy developments and the energy transition on small island development states in the Caribbean, I see clearly abundant renewable energy resources here, including solar, wind, and geothermal in some of the Caribbean islands. Let's say what creates the case here is that we can see that renewable energy technologies are available at lower cost as fossil fuels. So this is for sure the case for onshore wind, for offshore wind, but also for solar PV. And that creates positive business cases in many places in the world, and also in small island development states where the cost of the fossil fuels of diesel is and other crude oil is still very extensive. If I talk about substantive progress, maybe one example here, which is an outstanding one. So the island of Bonaire is already operating on 100% renewable electricity with a mix of wind and solar PV, providing most of the island's electricity needs. Other islands as Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and the Nevis, and Barbados have set ambitious renewable energy targets, and they are investing in renewable energy projects and developing basically the countries forward. But of course, there are some needs for the region. As IRENA, we still see that there is space of improvement to develop supportive policies and regulations on the islands. I mentioned earlier the need to increase the access to funds for renewable energies and to improve the financing and the risk mitigation, let's say, support for blended finance from development banks is still very important. The capacity building support to local institutions is something IRENA is working on, but I think more can be done. Also important to be able to carry on the island grids, which are sometimes even with diesel generators still unstable. We need to improve the grid infrastructure. We need to do grid studies where IRENA can support with a power factory or PSSE with GIS data to do a model of a grid and to advise in how to best integrate variable renewables and how to develop and operate the grids and the infrastructure with high loads of renewable energy. Also storage capacities to ensure the grid stability. And I mentioned earlier, maybe the opportunity to do something on hydrogen side and also on electromobility and heating and cooling could be things where the infrastructure needs to be accessed, and it needs to be looked into what can be done to use renewable electricity to support on this end use sector sides. So this requires all collaboration amongst governments, the private sector actors, and the international organizations like IRENA to mobilize the necessary support and the financing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roland. So yes, lots of collaboration needed, capacity building, better access to financing, better regulation and policy reform. Therese, tell me, how well is the multilateral sector doing in supporting this transition? We've talked a lot about the challenges.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think this is right in the wheelhouse of the MDBs, right? Roland mentioned the need for blended finance, concessional financing, and so on. But let's take IDB, for example, and CDB. It's right there up front and center of the mapping of the work that these institutions want to do in the region. And there are ongoing projects in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in other places. So I think these institutions are well placed to help with all of those issues Roland just mentioned, the regulatory reform, training of the workforce that's needed to do REs. I was very happy to see on the CCRE page, their website, that they have a nice documentation of where all of the countries are in the region in terms of their targets, lots of issues on their capacity, issues on training facilities, and where, who's offering what. So there are ways in which we're starting to monitor the progress. So that's really, I think, a very important aspect of this is to track, right? Monitor, track, see where we are. It's not working. Let's see what else we need to do. But certainly, I think the MDBs are doing their part. And I was very happy to see, for example, in the CDB's updated strategic vision, you know, this area looms very large in their thinking of where resources need to go in the Caribbean. So I think what is needed, in addition to all that's happening already on the policy side and on the MDB side, is to now connect it to the consumer. Consumers have to start saying, yes, I want an electric vehicle. Yes, I want more charging stations so that I can, you know, get from Kingston to Montego Bay without having to worry about where I'm going to charge my car. And by the way, there is a place right in the middle of that journey.
Good.
That's happening in Jamaica. In the Bahamas, there is talk about more charging stations coming and electric mobility coming. I see even now, for example, the Prime Minister's office has an electric vehicle, and they're very proud to say that. And people are starting to think that this makes sense, especially since it's so inexpensive to charge up a car. You can. I was just in a meeting last week where we were told it's like a fraction of what we're paying. If you're paying 10,000 Jamaican dollars right now to fill up your car in a week, you can use that same amount of money and charge up your car for a month. So it's that scale of savings, but people just don't know. And so I think all of us need to start thinking, all right, this ICE engine car that I have now, my next car is going to be an electric vehicle. So yeah, I think the MDBs are doing fine. I think we have to keep pushing at a consumer level, and of course for businesses who want to reduce their electricity costs. Roland mentioned a lot of options. You know, solar, heating, LED lighting, cool roofing for your buildings, and anything that reduces or improves the efficiency of the energy use, I think is helpful. And of course, you know, thinking about hydrogen, when we think about transportation costs in the Caribbean, that's another avenue, right? Roland, maybe you can speak a little bit about, is it really feasible for us to have, say, boats running on hydrogen energy between, say, Barbados and St. Vincent or in the Eastern Caribbean? Is that a possibility we can see? Because I see that happening in Europe, in hydrogen-powered fast ferries. Why can't we conceive of that happening in this region?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you hit the nail on the head when you said, Therese, it's about the consumer as well, because the private sector responds to what the consumer wants, and then also policy responds to what the electorate is agitating for. So to your point, I think a lot of people just don't know. I have an electric vehicle. I've had EVs since I came here to Barbados 5 years ago, and it cost me about 100 US equivalent a month to drive my car, which I don't know that you can, and I have to drive far to drop my child to school every day. So it is really, I think, about educating the consumer about what the options are, about how advantageous the options are, not just from a cost perspective, but from an environmental perspective. So I want to ask each of you, we can go in the same order. Jimmy, you first, then Roland, and Therese, we can tie up with you. You know, we need to leave the listeners today with a call to action. What should you be doing in your own personal lives? What should you be thinking about? How should you be thinking differently? So that's really what I would like to hear from you. What's the call to action coming from you? Jimmy, let's start with you.
Thanks, Marla. I'll start at the high level and then drill down to the consumer. I think at the policy level, we need to see the energy transition taken more seriously. I'm really disappointed that many of our governments emerging from the COVID crisis have gone back to a business as usual way of operating. You know, and even worse yet, with energy prices so high with what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war, you'd have thought that would have been the stimulus to get them to really accelerate that energy transition, but that hasn't happened. And you know, at CREF, I made a statement, and I'll make it here again. I think we need more energy champions in the region. We don't have energy champions in the region. Where in countries you've seen things happening, it's because one or two people have taken this and said, this is what we're running with, this is what we're doing. Because governments are so consumed with the firefighting, with trying to get the economy going, dealing with crime, dealing with youth unemployment, dealing with all of the other issues, that they they cannot take a step back and recognize the importance of this energy transition and how it will make their economies so much more competitive. Every single economic sector, tourism, manufacturing, agriculture, value added, will be made more competitive by bringing the price of energy down. That's the first thing. Policy has to change because many of our, again, we don't have the right policy environment. We don't have the right regulatory environment, as Roland spoke about. You don't have an independent regulator for the energy sector in many of our Caribbean islands. Some have it. So Jamaica has it. St. Lucia is just developing its regulator, as is Grenada. But so many countries don't have a regulator. If you don't have a regulator, an independent, objective, arm's length regulator, it's difficult for an independent power producer to come in, knowing that they're operating on a level playing field and that the incumbent utility is not getting advantage that make it impossible for that IPP, that's independent power producer, to survive. So we need that. We need a reform of our legislation because, again, many of our countries are working with antiquated electricity supply acts. In my country, St. Lucia, there's an electricity supply act back to 1965 that gives the incumbent utility an ATM monopoly on the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. The last thing I did as a minister in 2016, just before demitting office, was to unbundle generation from that to make it possible for there to be competition in generation, but still working with the single buyer. A lot of the other legislation that needs to come in place to incentivize the utility company to make improvements in energy efficiency, to incentivize the private sector to bring in energy efficient appliances. That's not there. Again, going back to policy, Therese spoke about the shipping sector. Why are all of our ports saying that we are shifting to coal iron? And we're saying that any cruise ship or any boat that comes into our port must switch its engines off and plug into our grid, and then that grid will be powered by renewable energy. So then we'd be selling electricity to a cruise ship. Any one of these cruise ships uses between 5 and 10 megawatts of electricity during the 8 hours it's berthed in our port. So can you imagine, like, sometimes in St. Lucia, you have 4 cruise ships berthed there. That's 20 megawatts. That's 1/3 of our peak demand that will now become available to Lucia. That's exporting electricity at a price that is higher than it is paying to, it is selling electricity to the domestic consumer. So that is an opportunity that we're not using. The EV market is a big one, but as you said, there's a lot of range anxiety, some of it uninformed range anxiety. There's no reason for there to be range anxiety in Barbados or in Grenada or in St. Lucia, but people are worried that they will not be able to go around the island. I can understand Jamaica, I can understand Ghana, but not those islands. So there's education that must take place so people can feel confident about buying these electric vehicles. And then when we drill down to the local level, people have to understand that there are things that we can do to reduce the problem. You know, we talk about climate change, and I love it, as I was saying before we came on, that I love when people blame everything, blame climate change for everything, but we are the ones who are exacerbating our situation. When we continue to put up big buildings in all of our countries, that we're not doing any rainwater harvesting, so we are depending on a water utility company to capture water, treat it, and then use electricity to pump it to our buildings, which we then use that water and we flush it down a toilet, or we use it to water a garden. That doesn't make sense. That's wasting water and wasting electricity. Those same buildings are built in such a way that we can't open the windows. So there's these beautiful trade winds that we're known for. You can't benefit from them. So your air condition has to be running 24/7 and your lighting has to be on 24/7. It makes no sense. So we need to change our building codes. And again, that starts at the high level, but it also starts at the level of the builders to appreciate that there's a way in which you could reduce the running costs of those buildings. And the final thing I want to speak on is how do we ensure that nobody's left behind in this energy transition? Because everything we've spoken about really benefits the people who can already afford to pay their energy bill. But the people who are living in the impoverished areas, how will they benefit from it? Well, my thing is to say to governments, you're very quick to put in footpaths and other things in some of these impoverished communities. Why don't you say to a community that we will put in a microgrid? It could be by populating every public building, the police stations, the health centers, the schools with solar PV panels. And the energy generated from these will offset the energy consumption of all of the people who live in that community. Or you put up a ground-mounted solar PV microgrid, and you say to the people in that community, for the rest of your life, you will never have to pay for electricity because we are generating electricity from this thing that we put in place. Then people will see, okay, this makes sense. This is something that we want. But for many people, there's a disconnect between the policies of government in the energy sector and how it's benefiting them. So they are not now compelling government to do the things that need to be done. So it's so much that has to be done. But I think we need energy champions, Marla, which we do not have. We need people to say, this is where we're going. You grab everyone by the scruff of the neck, and we move in that direction. And that is probably my biggest takeaway. When you have that, then we see movement. I can never forget Aruba, the premier of Aruba, Mike Iman. When he was there, Aruba was a leader. We even had energy conferences in Aruba. He was doing OTEC, ocean thermal energy conversion, solar, wind. When Mike Iman left office, Aruba just went back to normal. Our energy transition can't depend on one person. It has to be a national policy that we pursue. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing enough of that.
Jimmy, you can probably tell us all day what needs to be done in this region. Roland, what would be your call to action?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marla, and of course James, but also before Therese has said a lot of things. I kind of take it a little bit from a different angle. What needs to happen on the small island development states? We have to clearly understand that small island development states in the Caribbean are specifically hard exposed to climate change, so also cyclone and things. And I think in the first place, we have to find a way that, let's say, the energy transition, as James said, nobody should be left behind. And in reality, we at IRENA know that this energy transition globally, with all its benefits and the cost competitiveness of renewable energy technologies, has only benefited 50% of the world population, mainly in 20 countries. No? So least developed countries and small island development states did not have much benefits from this. And I think that's very important, that the countries that are most exposed to climate change come into, let's say, the fruits that this energy transition can bring. It is also very important to see the perspective that climate change and climate resilience and renewable energies has to be connected, you know. So we have to find ways and implement renewable energy technologies in a way that this creates resilience and protects the island. So this is something where, yeah, I don't know, where this aspect in making renewable energy technologies being a contributor to the island's climate resilience and also the resilience of the grids has been not taken serious enough, and IRENA is kind of working on these aspects. And what we are doing is, and Therese mentioned the point of also hydrogen networks and hydrogen infrastructure for the islands. We have to find ways that also those innovative technologies can be made beneficial for the islands. And let's say, looking then not only on the specific situation of one small island development state in the Caribbean, to have a more regional perspective is very important. So, and IRENA is also working on a regional roadmap called Regional Energy Transition Outlook for the Latin American and Caribbean, which aims to provide a detailed analysis of the energy transition pathways for the Caribbean region. And this will help the countries in the region to identify the most effective policies, the regulatory frameworks, and the investment needed, not only in the specific renewable energy generation technology, also to look into the broader infrastructure that is needed to, let's say, and to develop investment strategies for the region that bring the benefits of renewable energies also to the region is very important. I mentioned earlier, IRENA has set up already in 2014 in Samoa the SIDS Lighthouse Initiative. and this its Lighthouse Initiative is supporting small island development states in developing renewable energy projects and get them financed and access funds on the islands that can be used. Also, IRENA is doing island roadmaps and looking into pathways of the transition that have a comprehensive approach, not only looking in a single project, a broader strategy related to renewable energy targets, the integration of the end use sector, and how this can be transitioned is very important. And last but not least, I could have mentioned this first, is we have to strengthen still the capacities to operate with the technology in itself. And let's say to train 1 or 2 people on each island does not help a lot, you know. So if people are trained and they know how to deal with these technologies from the Caribbean, they are easily in the US or in Latin America or elsewhere. We need a broader program to really build up, let's say, from youth to students, a basis that is able to fully harvest and operate those technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Therese,
yeah, thank you. A lot has been said, and this has been a lot we packed in a short space of time. Just to wrap it up, I mean, there are economic opportunities in renewable energy. I am very much on the same line as Jimmy, where urgency towards this transition, because it affects everyone. We can't live without energy, but we want to live sustainably with our use of energy. And because we care about the planet, because we care about the environment, we need to move with alacrity. We need to move fast and get on with it. I love that Roland mentioned about the capacity building and the training, because here are opportunities for new jobs. And here is a sector where, you know, small businesses can start to emerge. We've seen that happening in Jamaica and other places, but there's real opportunity here. And I think we just need to keep the pressure on. Let's all plan to buy a new car, should be an electric vehicle. Let's all do water harvesting. Let's make sure we don't tear down trees, because as Jimmy was pointing out, the way our construction sector is going, it's not compatible with what's happening on the climate. So we need to be more careful about our decisions and just keep the pressure on. And there's a lot of technical work that's available. And this is just one opportunity to help bring more awareness to the subject to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. And thank you, James. Thank you, Roland. I really appreciate that you spent this time with us to tell us everything in a short space of time of what's going on in the region and what needs to be done. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who's watched us talk about the Caribbean energy revolution. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.